I'm going to try and follow that, Lilian. If you haven't seen Oliver, I'd encourage you to go see it because that song, as beautiful as it is, Liliana's character, Nancy, is really kind of an eye-opener. And what otherwise is sort of a funny play, it's about kids and these orphans and the gang they have, there's this character, Nancy, who kind of runs through it, and she's in a very dysfunctional relationship, an abusive relationship, and so it's like this wake-up call as you get towards the end of the movie. And I was talking with one of the parents after the show on Thursday night, and she said, like, what a great show. It's funny, but man, at the end. And that was the point of Oliver Twist. It was to help us to understand, to make us uncomfortable, and to help us to understand that things are not as they should be, that we live in a broken world. And in fact, some of you, I just thought of this, have heard of William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce was the guy who brought about the abolition of slavery in England specifically and all over the English Empire by the time he died. He lived just before, or died just before, Oliver Twist was written by Charles Dickens. And if you read anything about Wilberforce in his biography, he had two great passions. One was the abolition of slavery, but his other great passion was how wretched English society had become, how socially corrupt it had become. And so you read these descriptions, and then you see Oliver Twist, or Oliver as the musical is based on the book Oliver Twist, and you just see what he was talking about, why there was this need. But all that to say, the point of Oliver is to make us uncomfortable. And I think if you think about the society we live in, the culture we live in today, if you were to put on this side of the scale comfort and convenience, and you were to put on this side of the scale commitment and compassion, I think the scales would go like this. That our chasing of comfort and our chasing of convenience far outweigh our commitments and our compassions. Take for example, the issue of marriage. Marriage in a society that's totally focused on self-fulfillment, all of a sudden we leave commitment behind for convenience. And so if I'm here to be self-fulfilled and I feel like my spouse is not contributing to my self-fulfillment, then I'm going to go chase fulfillment because my spouse becomes inconvenient. Or take the issue of compassion. You get a $10,000 windfall. Again, just products of our culture. We get a $10,000 windfall, and we immediately begin to think of all the things you can do with the $10,000. You begin to think, maybe we can make our bathroom more comfortable, a nicer bathroom by remodeling the bathroom. And I don't think we even think about how to be compassionate with the $10,000 we got. We don't even think, okay, I'll spend $8,000 on the bathroom, and then I've got $2,000 left over to go help somebody. It's just not how we think. Because in our culture, comfort and convenience are idols. And as we worship these, we begin to walk away from commitment and compassion. It might look different from culture to culture what commitment and compassion look for or look like. But as we think around the history of the world, think around the Bible, we can see that this has always been a choice. That we can either be committed and compassionate or we can chase comfort and convenience. I think of the story of the Good Samaritan. The reason the story of the Good Samaritan resonates as it does 2,000 years later is because it cuts to the heart of human nature. The comfortable and the convenient thing to do was to walk by a beaten man on a dangerous road. I don't want that to happen to me. I don't have the time to take care of this, and that's going to take a lot of time. And then the Good Samaritan stops and shows compassion and a commitment to the good of that person who was beaten and laid on the road. Jesus tells that story to make the point of this. The greatest commandment is to love your neighbor. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, but love your neighbor. And he asks the question at the end of the parable, who's your neighbor? Who's your neighbor? Who are we commanded and called to love? Who are we called to be committed to and compassionate for? Well, Jesus wasn't the first one to teach that. In fact, as Jesus teaches that, to love your neighbor, all he's doing is living up to what God had always desired for his people. So in the Old Testament, we use the word law to describe it. I think it's kind of a bad translation. I think a better word is instruction. That God graciously reveals his instruction to his people. And the overriding value, especially as it dealt with relationships, was commitment and compassion. Nowhere do you read about convenience and comfort. And so when Jesus tells this parable of the Good Samaritan, all he's doing is putting flesh on the bones of a passage in Leviticus 19. I mean, talk about books of law. Leviticus ranks up there. And in Leviticus 19, it says, love your neighbor. Jesus tells us a story to show that that's what compassion looks like. This is what commitment to the good of others looks like. Jesus was the only one who's ever lived that out perfectly. But he's not the only one in Scripture that gives us an example of what this looks like. King David is another. We've been studying 1 and 2 Samuel. We've seen the rise of the first king of Israel, King Saul. And what we've looked at over the last couple weeks is the rise of King David. There's a particular story in David's life where there was a very clear, comfortable, and convenient path. And it was very counterculture for him to take a path of commitment and compassion. And yet we see in this story that David sort of ignores what was the cultural wisdom of his day. He ignores the comfortable route, he ignores the convenient route, and he embraces this compassionate route and this committed route. It has to do with one of Saul's descendants. Now, if you lived in the ancient world, this is what you did. This was the comfort. You did it for your own comfort, and you did it because it was the convenient thing to do, and that was you killed everybody who was from the royal family who had a rightful claim to the throne. So you can imagine, Saul has a son, Jonathan. Jonathan's next in line for the throne. Jonathan has a son named Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth could have a claim on the throne. This family is dismissed. God anoints David. So you have David as the king. The normal, the comfortable thing to do so that he wouldn't have to worry about him would be to kill Mephibosheth. That's just what you did. As you read Shakespeare, as you read Greek mythology, as you read Roman history, you see that this is what empires did. You killed off this line so that you didn't have to worry about this line. That was the comfortable thing to do. That was the convenient thing to do. But David doesn't choose comfortable and convenient. David chooses compassionate and committed. So open your Bibles to 2 Samuel chapter 9, and let's read this passage. We're going to see what David's commitment and his compassion look like. Then we're going to see why he would do that. Why would David choose compassion and commitment? And then we'll give some very lifelike living examples of how we can do the same thing. 2 Samuel chapter 9, if you grab a Bible from under your chair, will be on page 260 and 261. 2 Samuel chapter 9. David is now a well-established king in Israel. His southeastern borders have been taken care of. He's established Jerusalem as the political capital. He's also established it as the religious capital. All of Israel is moving towards this center in Jerusalem. David, at the end of chapter 8, has established his royal household, his royal court. He's resting in the royal residence. Everything is good for David, and if anybody had the right to be comfortable and to experience convenience, it was the king, right? But that's not what David does. David reaches out very intentionally to a servant of Saul named Ziba, and he says, Ziba, is there anybody left in Saul's line that I can show this compassion and this commitment? Pick it up in verse 4. The king, this is David, said to Ziba, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at Lo-debar. Then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, at Lo-debar. And Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and paid homage. And David said, Mephibosheth. And he answered, behold, I am your servant. And David said to him, do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. And I will restore you to all the land of Saul your father, and you shall eat at my table always. And he paid homage and said, what is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I? Can you imagine being from Mephibosheth? Ziba comes to you and he says, hey, King David wants to see you. And Mephibosheth knows. He's like walking the Green Mile. He is walking to his execution. But that's not what happened. When he stands before David, David says, no, I want to show you kindness. And that kindness word is that Hebrew word chesed. We've talked about that word before. It's not just kindness. We're going to read in another place where it's translated as steadfast love. And I think the two aspects of what this chesed is, what David is going to show Mephibosheth, is it's a compassion and it's a commitment. It's both of those things together. It's awesome what David does. Rather than killing him, he says, I'm going to show you kindness. Now, there's even another reason why Mephibosheth should be dismissed. He was lame. When he was 5 years old and Saul and Jonathan were battling and they're losing the kingdom and the war is raging, in order to save him, what would be the equivalent of his nanny puts him under her arm and begins to run. And as she's running, she stumbles and Mephibosheth falls and he either breaks one ankle or two ankles. But back in the day, there was no healing from that. They didn't have braces where they set the bones. And so he grows up lame. So when he says a dead dog as I, there's so much loaded into that phrase. And David says, no, but Mephibosheth, I'm going to be committed to you, and I'm going to be compassionate towards you. And it's revealed in the text, not just in what is said, but how it's said. Notice, again, David is referred to as the king. The king said to Ziba, the king. Ziba said to the king, and it's the king, and it's the king, and it's the king, until you get David talking to Mephibosheth and addressing him purposely. Go back to verse 6 and listen for that. And Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David. It's not the king anymore. He came to David and fell on his face and paid homage. And David said, the king didn't say this, David said it. Mephibosheth, and he answered, behold, I am your servant. And David said to him, do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan, and I will restore to you the land of Saul your father, and you shall eat at my table always. And he paid homage and said, what is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I? It's like the author of 2 Samuel is making this highlight. Like David, he sort of took his crown off, he humbled himself, and he became committed and compassionate to somebody that the convenient thing to do would be to kill him. The comfortable thing to do would be to kill him. But he doesn't do that. He shows compassion and he shows commitment. And the commitment goes beyond not killing him. The commitment David makes is for the rest of his life to take care of him. He invites him to his table. 3 times in the text it says, he will eat at my table. He will eat at David's table. Like he doesn't just not kill him. He goes above and beyond by showing this compassion and this commitment to Mephibosheth's good by inviting him into his table. Pick it up in verse 9. Then the king called Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, all that belonged to Saul and to all his house I have given to your master's grandson. And you and your sons and your servants shall till the land for him and shall bring him the produce, that your master's grandson may have bread to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall always eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so will your servant do. So Mephibosheth ate at the king's table like one of the king's sons. And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who lived in Ziba's house became Mephibosheth's servants. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate always at the king's table. Now he was lame in both his feet. David went above and beyond. He showed commitment to Mephibosheth. He showed compassion for Mephibosheth, and he invited him in, and what an honor. It was an honor if you got to eat at the king's table one time in your life. And he says, Mephibosheth, you're going to be one of my sons, and you're going to sit around my table for the rest of your life. That was commitment, and that was compassion. Now, why would a king do that? Why would David do that to somebody who could potentially be a rival to the throne? Well, we read in the passage 2 reasons. Look back in verse 1 and we see the first reason. David said, is still anyone left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness, and that's that chesed, for Jonathan's sake? And then if you look back up in verse 7, which we already read, and David said to him, do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. Now, who's this Jonathan? Again, Jonathan was the prince. He was Saul's son. He was supposed to be the next king of Israel. But David and Jonathan, though rivals to the throne in a natural sense, were literally soulmates, is how the Bible describes them. They had a love towards one another. They had a commitment to one another. They even shared a covenant with one another. And if you turn back in your Bibles a few pages to 1 Samuel chapter 20, We can read about this. Why David would show compassion and kindness and commitment to Mephibosheth was because of this relationship with what you might call his best friend. We're going to pick it up in verse 13. Saul, the king, is trying to kill David, and Jonathan at that moment chooses David over Saul. Over his own dad and his future as king of Israel, he chooses the Lord's anointed, David, the future king. Verse 13, but should it please my father to do you harm, this is Jonathan saying, the Lord do so to Jonathan and more also, if I do not disclose it to you and send you away that you may go in safety. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, the chesed. Show me that compassion. Show me that kindness. Show me that commitment, that I may not die. And do not cut off your steadfast love, your chesed, from my house forever. And when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth, and Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Jonathan and David had a covenant agreement. And so part of the reason why David shows compassion and commitment to Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, is because of that commitment. Because he had entered into that covenant agreement. Jonathan, I will take care of your descendants. And he made good on that promise, and he was committed to Mephibosheth, and he was compassionate for Mephibosheth. But I think there's even a larger, more overriding reason why David showed the kindness, the chesed, the compassion, the commitment to Mephibosheth. And if you turn back, we see that in chapter 9 again. In verse 3, chapter 9, and the king said, is there not still someone of the house of Saul that I may show the chesed of God to him? That I may show the kindness of God. It's not because of Jonathan at this point. It's because of God. This overflows from chapter 7. Turn back one page. God has chosen David as the king of Israel. And the word that's used to describe what God is doing for David is chesed. Chapter 7, verse 15. But my steadfast love will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever in accordance with all these words and in accordance with all this vision Nathan spoke to David. Nathan, the prophet, comes to David and he says, David, God's covenant faithfulness, God's steadfast love, God's commitment and his compassion towards you is going to last forever. And do you remember David's response from last week? Who am I? Who am I? Who is my household that God would show us that compassion and that commitment? David experienced the love of God. He experienced the kindness of God. He experienced this commitment and this compassion, and David's response was to show commitment and compassion rather than to chase convenience and comfort. It was because of what God had done for him that David was going to do to Mephibosheth. If David was willing to do that because of what God showed him, is there any difference in our lives? That we have a king who left heaven, a king who has invited us to his table, and the only reason we can be considered his child and to sit around his table is because he was willing to die for us. He was willing to show us a compassion that led him to bleed on the cross and to die. He was willing to show us a commitment to walk that path, that if God was going to make good on his promise and his commitment to his people and to have an eternal relationship with his people, then sin had to be atoned for. Sin had to be paid for. And Jesus became our substitute. That's the compassion that we've been shown. That's the commitment that we've been shown. And just like David, God calls us out of the overflow of the compassion and the commitment that we have, that we've been shown. It compels us to show compassion and commitment to those in our area of influence. We have the opportunity to display a similar compassion and a similar commitment by seeking out the good of those God brings into our path. We've been doing this as a church for a while now through World Vision, and we thought it would be a great morning to invite John Huddle up with some very special guests to talk about how we can show some compassion and be committed to the good of others. John?
I'm ready to, well, I don't know if I'm ready or not. I'm so stoked to connect with Anita and her family. She seems excited to see me. My family, we sponsor 4 children, and Anita will be our 5th. And I just believe in sponsorship so much. The most awesome moment when we're walking through the school was Anita reached out and took my hand. And she was like leading me through the school. It was really special, you know? Like, she took my hand. I mean, look at your pictures. Oh my goodness, these are great. I get to see the goats. I get to go pull weeds in the millet field and in the maize field. She's grinding millet with her own hands, right? And she taught me how to grind millet. And she works with such diligence and no complaining. About to head out to the family's water source. We gathered water, and she had just filled her little jerry can up with this like green water that had moss all over it, and there were water bugs in the water, and I saw a baby snake in the water. And right there, that's the chink in the armor. You know, that's where the integrity of all this beauty is going to be destroyed, is through that water. Anita, asante sana. I just felt totally at home with the family. She's super smart, like brilliant, and a great listener. When I left at the end of the day, it was extremely emotional, and my heart is rocked, and I'm on fire, and I cannot wait to write her. And I'm just, excited that I get to be a part of her life and invest in her life in that way.
Hey OCF, how's everybody doing? All right, I am so excited and honored to introduce to you today. Thank you for the help. Yes. Oh, yes, 3 mics. Get ready. I am so excited to introduce to you today Anita. One of the Huddle family sponsored children. Would you welcome her? And if you want to welcome her in a traditional Kenyan way, you can say hujambo, or actually, no, let's say karibu, which means welcome. And if you really want to welcome her, you'll say karibu sana, all right? Karibu sana. 1, 2, 3.
Karibu sana.
Anita, thank you guys. Anita arrived with her mother Dina and Catherine, who I'll introduce shortly, this last week. And we have a picture of her at the beach with my daughter Sydney. And when Sydney and Anita came together, it was like 2 comets of love just colliding, And we've been so excited to have Anita here. I was in Bartabwa, Kenya, where Anita lives in June, where there's a 50% child mortality rate for children before the ages of 5 years old. That means half of the kids before the age of 5 are going to make it, and half are not. All right, and I was hosted by Dina, Anita's mother. So would you welcome her today? And yesterday was the Team World Vision group training, and so I thought like Dina and Anita would come and cheer and be there with me, and we have a picture. Dina ran the 5K test run with your Team World Vision team and crushed it. And it was an incredible moment when she came in, and very powerful. And so we are so happy to have Dina here. And then this is my colleague at World Vision Kenya, Catherine. Now, World Vision Kenya is like the Apple computer of clean water development globally, all right? World Vision leads in that space. They're the #1 provider of clean water on the planet. That's not a government. That's not a boast. That's just by God's grace, that's just where we're at right now, all right? Well, Catherine she manages development in the northern region of Kenya. It's subdivided into 4 regions, and she's going to be translating today. I speak a little Swahili, but the indigenous language there is, the indigenous dialect is Kalenjin. So Catherine is going to be kind of guiding us through. So Catherine, my colleague and my friend, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
And then Mama Anita, may I have the microphone? I'm going to give it to Anita. Anita. What is your full name?
My name is Anita Jerudit Barduin.
Yeah. And what are the names of your sisters and brother?
Kiara Goan Jepturu, Genesis Kaptoya Japurigat, Anita.
And you saw Genesis in the video. She has 5 sisters, 1 brother, and Genesis is a twin. Is her twin, yeah. And when you're at home, Anita, what are your jobs when you're at home?
Una Bagalis Koe in Lavia Nye Jesumo Koen Kobukot.
Anita says when she's at home, she helps her mother to clean the house, to wash the dishes. She goes to the forest to fetch firewood, and she goes to the river to fetch water.
Awesome. Thank you, Anita. Mama Anita. What is it like going to get water where you live?
Dina says that it's a long travel to go to the river, 3-hour round trip, actually, to go to the river, fetch water, and carry that jerrycan. You saw what they were carrying in the video? Yes, up the hill, 3 hours.
When I asked Anita yesterday, hey, where'd you get that water from? She said, I took you to the river. She actually said that to me. And you see the family going to the river, and we talk at World Vision a lot about safe and clean water, safe and clean. It's not an exaggeration to say that the road to the river is treacherous. And there are 2 men watching us the whole time, watching Anita and Dina. And I asked Abraham, do you know who those men were? He did not know who they were. When the children are out, they're exposed to multiple levels of threat, as well as disease from dirty water. Catherine, I'm going to kick it to you, if that's all right. Could you talk a little bit about, because this is your field of expertise, what happens when clean water enters a community? Because to be clear, Anita has clean water at her school and a safe bathroom at her school, but not near her home. Could you talk about the impact that water and development through sponsorship brings to a family?
Thank you. Through sponsorship, World Vision is able to address some of the serious development issues in poor communities. One of them is actually development of water projects. And when we develop water projects close to the communities where these people live, they are able to spend less time to fetch water. And the other thing is we've trained them to make sure that they drink clean, safe water. Children don't have to die because of waterborne diseases like typhoid and cholera. And we also ensure that when we have clean water closer to the villages, it allows the children who used to go to fetch water in the river early in the morning before school to actually just leave home and go to school. They reach school, they are able to concentrate in class, unlike before when they used to go to fetch water. When they go to school, they are sleepy already, they are tired, they are not able to concentrate in class, and that affects their performance. So we've been able to address the issues of distance, the issues of safe drinking water to reduce incidences of waterborne diseases, and also to provide an opportunity for children to be able to go to school and perform well. We also develop food security projects and nutrition projects. And this includes establishment of irrigation systems so that communities are able to access food for their families, and also ensure that their young children are well nourished. The first 1,000 days of the life of a child are very critical, and most of these communities where we work in don't understand that it is important to give their children good nutrition when they are growing up at that tender age. So we have seen children who are stunted in the communities. Not only is their heights short in terms of stunting, but also it affects their mental development. So it's a long-term side effect when children don't get good nutrition in the first 1,000 years. When in places where we don't have health facilities, we facilitate mobile clinics so that children can get immunization against some diseases. And also we have done education projects where we have better learning environments for children. We have constructed classrooms and equipped those classrooms and given them books and given them some solar lamps, because there is no electricity in most of these places. So we give them solar lamps so that they are able to even continue studying at home in the evenings. And maybe finally, just to say, we also do advocacy programs, child protection, we do spiritual nurture for children, and we do economic development for communities.
Awesome, Catherine. Thank you so much. Anita, what is your dream job?
Lagu madam.
Catherine, can you explain?
Okay. Anita says when she grows up, she would like to be a teacher. And the term that she used is madam. And in Kenya, a female teacher is madam.
I have been to Anita's school, as you could see in the video, and was able to meet her teacher, who's a female teacher and loves this family. And when you sponsor a child, I know many of you are familiar with child sponsorship. People even ask me, Johnny, when I see the faces on the packets, is that an actual child, or do you just print out 1 million of those packets? So it's all right to ask those questions, because I don't know what people have dealt with in the past. The child on that packet is only on that packet until the expiration date on the back of the packet. All right, those packets expire, and then we will reprint packets or introduce the child into sponsorship in another way. So there is no other place that child is, no website, no other packet. So even like when you go and you see the packets today, we ask that people don't take the packets and leave with the packets, because that's we want to get that little boy or girl sponsored, you know. And so when we sponsor a child, it's also not a one-to-one relation. It's not a one-to-one relationship only. You are in a one-to-one relationship with the child, but if you just kind of track with everything Catherine's listing, the development is massive and community-wide, and it transforms the community. So instead of just 3,000 privileged children, we want to see the entire community transformed. And since we've been working in Bartabwa, 20% of people in Bartabwa, Kenya were following Jesus. Right now, that number is over 90%. It's around 92%. And we don't compel a single people into the faith by saying, hey, if you accept Jesus, then you get clean water. We just go in and do what God's called us to do, sharing the gospel as we go, and we're seeing incredible transformation take place. And so today you have in your bulletin, and I'm totally going to ask you to pull this out if you don't mind. You have in your bulletin 2 cards. The first one is this skinny, narrow card. If you know today, man, I want to sponsor a child, or maybe 2 children. In the video, I say we have 5 sponsored children, but when I got back from Bartabwa this Sunday, I found out that our 5th child, David, his community graduated. And they are now completely self-sufficient. And so World Vision informed me of that. And so right now we have 4 sponsored children, but which is so exciting, you know. But if you know God's calling you to sponsor a child today, I want you to fill this out and then have that in your hand. And at the end of the service, you can go back and meet Katie and Kurt. They'll be at the sponsorship display, and you can meet one of those children. One of those children is actually a classmate of Anita's good friend. We saw her yesterday, and it kind of blew us away. You have another insert in your bulletin, which is called the Matthew 25 Challenge, which OCF, my people, I co-wrote this challenge. And it's the first time we've ever done it, if you don't mind me saying that. Please participate. All you got to do is text M25 to the number 44888. You'll have a daily challenge this week delivered to your smartphone, and I guarantee you it'll challenge you and encourage you and fill you with love. But we are praying today that after meeting Anita and the family, that you will feel God calling you to sponsor a child. It's an incredible experience, and it's totally rocked my family, and I know it will help you step into that Matthew 25 vision of loving the least of these. Jesus says, the least of these brothers and sisters of mine. Whatever you've done for them, you've done it for me. I thank you for your time. I need to cut this short. I'm going a little over. God bless you guys. Please fill out those cards if you feel so led, and come back and meet your sponsored child today. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita and Dina and Catherine. That's right. And John. Just great stories. Awesome to hear. I'm not sure who's worse off this morning, those who speak English and have to listen to me 3 times, or those who don't speak English and can tune me out 3 times. But yeah, just to highlight again, this is the sponsorship child. This one, even if you're not called to sponsor a child, I would encourage you to do this challenge. And the reason is, I think the first step towards compassion is empathy. And that's really the heart of this challenge, is that every day you would another part of you would kind of empathize. You'd become empathetic for what many people around the world are going through. And then next week, we'd love to hear, we'll probably have something in the bulletin for you to write a little bit of your experience, and we can share that. And then you also have something that we're getting behind that is not global, but local. And that's this half sheet or quarter sheet paper that you have here, or 1/3 sheet, I'm not quite sure what that is. And the foster care system in Los Angeles is in such need, dire need of people, and I would love to flood the foster care system with people who have a Christ-centered worldview. And we have 2 ladies in our church, at least 2 that I know of, Betty Freitag and Lisa Hall. Betty, there you are. Stand up so everybody can see who you are. Yeah. And so Betty has been in this more than 20 years, 10 years, okay. And so Betty will be out at the table there, and you can learn more about that, how you can get involved with that and to become a light into a very tangible and great need here in Los Angeles. So.